Welcome to Crime Era Channel, where every crime tells a story, the darkest secrets of crime are uncovered and the hidden truths of criminal underworlds come to light. Soft guitar chords. Archival footage flickers. Protests, peace signs, the smell of revolution in the air. The 60s were supposed to end in harmony. The decade began with music, flowers, and the promise of love. But by 1969, the dream had turned feverish, a kaleidoscope melting into chaos. The world was burning in Vietnam. Cities trembled with protest. And somewhere in California, a man with dark eyes and a prophetic voice claimed he had seen the end and the rebirth of it all. His name was Charles Manson, and his dream would devour the very movement that birthed it. When peace becomes a language for control, paradise can become hell. He came from nowhere. Born in shadows, raised by neglect, Manson was a product of broken homes and prison walls. Behind the charm was survival, and behind the smile, a mind that studied every weakness in others. When he was released from prison in 1967, America was in flux. Young people wandered the streets of San Francisco, shedding identity in search of something spiritual, something pure. And Manson, with his guitar, his mystic gaze, and his strange poetry, gave them that something. To the lost, he was a shepherd. To himself, a god in exile. He spoke of freedom, of love without boundaries, of a world that needed to be reborn. But beneath those words was a hunger, not for peace, but for power. They called themselves the Family. Women with flowers in their hair, men with dust on their boots, all orbiting the magnetic force of Charlie. Their sanctuary, Spawn Ranch, an abandoned film set turned commune, nestled in the California hills. Their time dissolved. Names changed. Identities faded. They lived off stolen food and scavenged dreams. Manson preached a gospel that fused Christianity, LSD visions, and fragments of rock lyrics. To his followers, he was the bridge between this world and the next. To outsiders, just another drifter. But in the eyes of those he mesmerized, he was the axis of a new world order. They didn't see madness. They saw meaning. The world turned, and the music played. The Beatles had released the White Album, and Manson heard more than melody. In his mind, every lyric carried revelation. Helter Skelter wasn't just a song about chaos, it was a prophecy. A coded message to him, calling for the apocalypse that would cleanse the earth. He told his followers that the black population would rise against the white establishment, ignite a race war, and destroy civilization, but the family would survive, hidden in the desert, to emerge as leaders of the new world. It was a fantasy stitched together from paranoia, racism, and delusion. But to those entranced by his charisma, it sounded divine. Manson wasn't selling fear, he was selling purpose. And purpose is the most addictive drug of all. Inside the ranch, control grew tighter. No one questioned Charlie. His word was scripture. He rationed food, commanded affection, and demanded absolute loyalty. Each night, LSD trips turned into sermons. Under the stars, he'd whisper of death, rebirth, and cosmic war. He convinced them the world was ending, that they were chosen to survive it, that every act, even violence, was part of a divine plan. To break free, they had to destroy what bound them, the world itself. It wasn't just a cult. It was a slow hypnosis of an entire generation's pain. Manson believed he was destined for fame. He courted record producers, claiming his songs carried the truth the world refused to hear. But Hollywood didn't listen. The rejection twisted him. When a music producer at a home on Cielo Drive brushed him off, Manson saw it not as failure, but betrayal. In his rage, he told his family the war must begin. If the world wouldn't listen to his message, they would hear his chaos instead. Dark silhouettes. Headlights slicing through the night. August 8, 1969. 4 followers drove under the California moon. Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Linda Kasabian. Their orders were simple: do something witchy. They arrived at 10050 Cielo Drive, unaware or unconcerned that the music producer who'd once lived there had moved out. Inside was actress Sharon Tate, 8 months pregnant, and her friends. What followed would shock the world. When police arrived the next morning, they found words scrawled in blood. And with them, the end of innocence for an entire generation. The following night, Manson himself led the group. They entered another home, that of Leno and Rosemary LaBianca. Again kiss. Again, symbols of a warped gospel left behind. Manson believed these killings would spark the race war he had preached about for months. But instead of apocalypse, it brought investigators to his door. The family unraveled as fear replaced faith. Loyalty cracked under interrogation. And by the time the police arrived at Spahn Ranch, the dream of paradise was over, replaced by horror. The courtroom became a circus of defiance. Manson carved an X into his forehead, later reshaping it into a swastika. His followers sang outside the courthouse, chanted his name, and smiled as if on holy mission. Prosecutor Vincent Bugliosi pieced the madness together, showing the world how words became weapons, how delusion became direction, how Manson never held a knife, but orchestrated death through manipulation. The verdict, guilty on all counts. The sentence, death, later commuted to life imprisonment. But by then, Manson's face had already become an icon, a symbol of how charisma can curdle into chaos. When the news broke, the world mourned not just the victims, but the death of a dream. The summer of love had ended in blood and disbelief. The counterculture that had promised enlightenment now carried the stain of madness. The Manson family murders marked the true end of the 60s, the moment innocence fell silent. They wanted to change the world. Instead, they reminded it how fragile goodness can be. The family scattered. Some repented. Others remained loyal to the end. And Charles Manson, the man who thought he was chosen by destiny, spent the rest of his life behind bars, still preaching, still believing, still unrepentant. The camera pans over Los Angeles, 1970. The city glows, but its pulse has changed. The Manson case became more than a trial. It became a mirror. It showed the world the dark cost of blind devotion. Newspapers called Manson a monster. Others called him a symptom, a wound opened by the chaos of the decade. For months, television screens flickered with images of his followers smiling in court, whispering his words like sacred hymns. The public saw youth turned into instruments of terror and asked, how could this happen? The answer was complicated, because Manson didn't brainwash them with violence. He used love, music, and a promise of meaning. And meaning, once corrupted, can enslave. They didn't follow a killer. They followed a dream until the dream killed them. Some of his followers refused to let go. Years passed, but their loyalty didn't. They visited him, wrote to him. Some even tattooed his image, proof that his influence didn't end with the bars. Society saw them as lost souls. But psychologists saw something deeper, a phenomenon known as coercive persuasion, the gradual erosion of self until only belief remains. These women weren't born to kill. They were born to follow. And Manson, like many cult leaders, understood the art of filling emptiness with destiny. He didn't need to hold them captive. He made them believe they were free. Experts began dissecting the anatomy of Manson's manipulation. They found a blueprint, one echoed in other cults across history. First came love, then isolation, then the redefinition of reality itself. He broke their identity piece by piece, replacing doubt with devotion. He used drugs to blur judgment, then music to reinforce belonging. Every ritual at Spahn Ranch wasn't chaos. It was programming disguised as enlightenment. To outsiders, it looked like freedom. Inside, it was submission crafted through illusion. The name Manson became a brand of horror. Books, films, songs. Everyone tried to capture the madness, but few grasped the humanity underneath. The tragedy became entertainment. The line between reflection and fascination blurred. America couldn't look away, because Manson was both alien and familiar. He embodied the fear that even paradise could hide a predator. In every age, society creates its devils, not to worship them, but to remember what they reveal. And what Manson revealed was that evil isn't always grand. Sometimes, it's simply persuasive. From rock lyrics to Hollywood scripts, Manson's ghost lingered. Artists invoked him as a warning or as rebellion. Some wore his image without understanding the cost. He became the anti-hero of a disillusioned age, proof that fame and fear could coexist. But the real story wasn't his face. It was the caution buried beneath it, a message about the danger of surrendering one's moral compass to another's conviction. He wanted to be famous. He became infamous. And infamy, he learned, is a cage all its own. Years turned into decades. The world moved on. New wars, new idols, new scandals. But the question remained, why do people still follow leaders like Manson? Sociologists argue it's the same hunger that drives faith, politics, even social media. The desire to belong. The longing for certainty in an uncertain world. Manson exploited that longing, dressing control as connection. And though his ranch turned to dust, the echoes of his charisma live in every modern figure who promises truth in exchange for obedience. The face changes. The formula remains. As Manson aged in prison, the cult of personality around him thinned, but never disappeared. He gave interviews, ranted about the system, claimed divinity, and laughed at his own myth. To the end, he believed he had seen the world clearly, that everyone else was blind. But behind those eyes was a man terrified of being forgotten. The world didn't worship him anymore. It studied him as a lesson in how charisma can become contagion. When he died in 2017, the world didn't mourn. It reflected. The story of Manson isn't about one man's darkness. It's about how easily light can follow it. The term Helter Skelter still chills the air. What was once a Beatles song became a symbol of terror, chaos, and ideology gone mad. Today, criminologists use the Manson case as a study in manipulation. Professors teach it to explain how radicalization grows. Filmmakers return to it, searching for the line between free will and influence. But perhaps the truest meaning of Helter Skelter isn't destruction, it's warning. That belief, when unanchored by empathy, becomes its own weapon. It was never about the end of the world. It was about the end of humanity within it. The final scene fades in, the California desert at dawn. Wind whispers across empty hills. A lone cross stands, crooked, in the sand. Manson's story didn't just close a chapter in crime. It closed an era. The 1960s began with harmony and hope, and ended in echoes of screams. The family dreamed of a world reborn, and instead buried a generation's innocence. But their story endures, not to glorify, but to remind, that every age must guard against the seduction of certainty, that freedom without conscience can become a cage, and that even the most beautiful ideals can rot when power wears the mask of enlightenment. In the mirror of Charles Manson, we saw not just madness, but ourselves, a reflection of what happens when love forgets its limits and faith forgets its light. End credits roll as an instrumental version of Helter Skelter hums in reverse, distorted, eerie, unresolved.